climate crisis, and yet we're seeing unprecedented innovations in clean energy. Authoritarianism is surging, but so are youth-led pro-democracy movements. AI might outsmart us all, or it might solve problems that we've been waiting for centuries to solve. And what's at the center of all this? The largest youth population in human history. They are facing daunting challenges, but they're armed with more tools, connectivity, and collective power than any generation before them. From climate strikes to digital revolutions, young people aren't just inheriting our world, they're actively reinventing it, they're actively shaping it. But the question is, are our systems ready for change as fast as they are? Today we're talking to 6 people who are at the frontier of this generational shift. They're going to tell us if the future is as bright as youth optimism would suggest, or if it is as bleak as youth cynicism might suggest. So let me introduce our panelists. This is Raghuram Satyanarayana, who's Joint Secretary of Policy Planning and Research at the Ministry of External Affairs in India. Jainaba Sowe is the Public Relations Officer at Open Gambia Network. Vanshica Kant, who is the Climate, Human and Social Development Expert at the Asian Development Bank. Malshini Senaratne is the Assistant Head of Development at the University of Seychelles. Charlotte Rose, who is the Director of North Star CLS, and Pegor Papazian, who is the Chief Development Officer at TUMI. So a very, very diverse panel indeed. Each of our panelists is, as we know, navigating the complex interplay between youthful aspirations and institutional frameworks. So let's dive right in. To begin with, Charlotte, I think I'd love for you to open this out by telling us a little bit about the generation that is at the center of the conversation we're about to have. Gen Z is, well, it's, as I said, full of paradoxes, and you work in training them to be leaders, the next generation of leaders. So maybe you could prime us for this conversation by telling us about the world that they have inherited, the challenges and opportunities in front of them, and what their approach might be.
Thanks, Manasi. It's such an interesting perspective, right? And I think you've really opened us up well to, it's a world of paradoxes. We think about where we're up to, and I think you used the word bleak. I would agree. Bleak and brilliant. When we look at what this generation is inheriting, we might say this is probably one of the most exciting times to be alive to date. Absolutely revolutionary technology, unparalleled opportunities and possibilities in the global arena, mobility like we've never seen it, connectivity like we've never seen it. And yet, this is a generation that is faced with, I consider, 3 major areas of issue. The first, the VUCA environment, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And when we think about that, you know, this is a generation post-pandemic trauma, yes or yes, right? As adults, we struggled with it. These were children. When we think about the environment itself, this is a generation that is facing a combination, and please forgive me, this is different from country to country, but it's a generation that faces war in some places, the cost of living crisis in others. We're looking at public debt that has never been seen in the way it is being seen today, and no clear pathway forward to solve for that. We've got access to education, health, and infrastructure being challenged in developing nations. So as we look at this and we compound that with a future of climate change, and we're saying we don't have a clear pathway forward, I can completely understand why this generation would sit there and say, I feel anxious and stressed and mildly depressed about where it is we're at today. I train not just emerging leaders, but I train leaders within organizations, companies, institutions as it is today. I train them on how to navigate themselves and lead others through VUCA situations. What training has a 12-year-old got? What training does a 25-year-old have? And so this is an environment that is extremely complex. So that's the first area. The second area that I really consider to be challenging for this generation is the social makeup that they have. We are seeing across the world multiculturalism like we have never seen it before with mobility, right, with immigration. But we're also seeing the challenges of that. We look at what's happening in the UK. We hear, commentary coming out of, I don't know if anybody picked up The Spectator for Australia recently, but there are huge articles talking about how are we going to navigate a multicultural environment and really move forward together in a meaningful fashion. This is the most ethnically diverse generation we've seen. So how do they feel and navigate the immigration systems in that perspective? And then second to this, we're in a mass misinformation age, right? I'm not sure how it is that you get your news stories and news sources and news information. This is a generation that's absorbing it in social media forums where 10 times the speed of misinformation flies through those platforms and mediums than traditional media. So how are we going to help them when algorithms are set to maintain and persist with a perspective that suits your own narrative? It's actually causing the opposite of what we're all trying to do here today, which is foster dialogue. It's really going to continue to drive a dogmatic view of what's happening in the world that aligns to one's own. That's massively challenging. And so we've got bias within that, and it's a bias that needs to be navigated. So that's the second area. And then the third, and I do not think we can sort of understate the importance of this, is the technological revolution that we're seeing today. And this, to me, has two sides to it. It is fiercely scary in that we have no idea where we're going. We have no idea what it is that is yet to come. It is completely revolutionizing air to agriculture industries. It means a transformation of job. It means a transformation needed within education, which is being outpaced by technology changes. And so as we look at this, how are we skilling and how are we equipping this generation moving forward? So as we look at it, there are the three key things happening within the environmental context. And then there are two really key factors in terms of this generation and why they're different from us here within the room. I look around and I'm not seeing many Gen Z representatives, but my friend over here from Gambia. So, when we think about it, what is prevalent in the mindset of somebody in Gen Z? Now, you all probably know somebody aged between 12 and 27, so I want you to pop those in mind as I share this with you. When we think about their mindset, what is it that stands out to us? Well, the first thing is, as I share with you, I would train business, political leaders on how to navigate the environment they're in. This is an overstimulated, overwhelmed generation. When we look at what that means, they have mental health crisis like we have never seen. Around the world, we're looking at 30 to 50% of Gen Z individuals having some kind of mental health issue. We are seeing that within all of this, there is an ID fluidity. What does that mean? I was fascinated by this because I love talking identity. What we mean by this is it's a less religiously affiliated generation. It is an ethnically and racially diverse generation like we have never seen before. It is a generation that is sexually very open. It is a generation that is identity pronoun open. Nothing is taken for given, right? And so with that, they are a really focused generation on diversity, equity, inclusion. How do we make sure everybody feels like they count in society? They are a socially justice-oriented community where they're saying, what's right and what's wrong? Let's get to the heart of that, right? And they're a generation that cares deeply about the future of our world. They're socially conscious. So that climate change question that is front of mind, they're looking at the grown-ups in the room over the past couple of generations and saying, you've had this problem, what have you done about it? They are antagonized, they are frustrated, they are currently living in rejection of the system. The trust that they have currently when it comes to the political, business, religious establishments is an all-time low. And so as we look at this, their question currently is, who can I trust to get the jobs done that need to be done today? When they look at their representation, they're looking at political and business establishment. And I'm curious to know, do you all know the average age of a political or a business leader today in the world? It's in their 50s. That is not an age group that resonates with somebody who is 12 to 27 saying, do you understand the urgency and the crises that we are entering into? Because essentially what you're telling me is, I may come out of school with an education that is not going to support a job because those jobs have evolved and changed so much, with education access that was difficult to get and unaffordable, with a housing situation that may be completely inaccessible to me. And I would understand why that generation is scared by that and disappointed with what they're seeing is going on. And so as we look at this generation, huge question for us is, how do we as political and business leaders build trust, equip and skill ourselves to be having better conversations, better dialogue, and better resonance with that community? And how do we better skill this generation to do better moving forward? And as we look at this, I have to say the statistics right now are a little bit concerning. We're seeing that over 40% of the business leadership community right now would say Gen Z is not equipped. They are very digitally savvy, but they are not equipped for the work environment as of yet. 51% in a recent research study would say Gen Z did not feel that their education has adequately supported them for the work environment. And so as we're looking at this, we are seeing 1 in 5 of Gen Z currently considered not employed and not in education. So what is happening? We're seeing fallout. We're seeing non-participation necessary, or non-affiliation, I should say, with political groups and environments. They're a highly active, highly entrepreneurial community where they're saying to us, as a generation, we're going to have to do something different and creatively to get ourselves a foothold in society. But I am not trusting the tech giants that I see today. I'm not trusting the politicians I see today. And I am not sure about the business direction that I'm seeing a lot of corporations take in order for us as a society to be taken care of. So I'm just going to go out and do it on my own. So how do we then, as leaders, really look at how it is we can increase participation of these individuals? How do we look at increasing skill sets when it comes to communication, when it comes to critical thinking and attention? I don't know if you've seen recent statistics. 8 seconds is the current attention span of a Gen Zer. And what is really exciting, if we are able to engage them, is for those of you that may be aware, there is an amazing game at the moment called Roblox. Has everybody heard of Roblox? Just a show of hands if you're across it. Okay, for those of you that are not familiar, it is a game where totally different to the way all of us in this room grew up, where we were given games and told what the rules were to play. This is a generation where they join Roblox. They make the game. They are the creators. The players are the creators of the game. Now, why is that interesting and exciting for us? Well, as I look at that, that says to me, this is a generation that has a creative mind that with access, with opportunity, will participate, will be active, will be entrepreneurial in their mindset, but they need a skill set of support and some level of mentoring as to how it is to navigate the space. And I know that we've got Tumo here. I cannot begin to tell you how excited I am about sharing what it is that they are doing. It's a unique world first, but I think that this is going to really help us close some of the skill gaps that we're seeing. Maybe not so much from an immediate leadership perspective, but certainly from some of those digital skills that are so deeply required in the space at the moment. So there's a bit of context.
Charlotte, a really quick follow-up question. Yeah. Are we headed for a clash, do you think, then, between an potentially outdated system and unstoppable change?
And with the system, which ones are you speaking to?
The system that the current generation is inheriting, that Gen Z is inheriting.
Look, I mean, controversial, and some of you may not like this answer, but I would say we need to reimagine. The realities of our current system is, the large majority of individuals right now in Gen Z are not represented. They don't have voice. They don't necessarily have vote in their systems. Do they get opportunities to work in spaces, or are those opportunities being dominated by older generations with an assumption that a degree is going to make you more capable, for example? I think these are things that we really need to question. Educational reform, political system, potential reform, and certainly within the business community, an opportunity for us really to re-examine what are the roles, what are the approaches. Samir spoke really well to this in the other room. The political, the technical, the technological, and the business communities having stronger conversations together is going to set us up much better for the future of where we're going, because the current systems we have in play are isolated and not working interdependently, which is going to be required.
Thank you. I think you've set the stage really nicely for us. And we've talked about skill development quite a bit. So, Pegor, I'd love to talk to you about skill development. I know that the work that you're doing in terms of technological upskilling is incredibly important. At the same time, the change is unstoppable. AI is changing. I mean, AI has probably changed between the last time we had this conversation and now. Mm-hmm. So how do we prepare this generation, Gen Z, for a world that we don't even know what it is? We're not just preparing them for jobs that exist now. We don't know what the jobs of tomorrow are going to be.
Right. I would say we're not even sure there will be jobs per se. I mean, there may be things to do, but there may not be jobs necessarily. So yes, this is a very crucial question. I'm one of the co-founders of the TUMO Center for Creative Technologies, and for the past decade, we have been working on this. We have been trying to do a kind of education, learning process which does not put the emphasis on particular disciplines or training or retraining. In fact, we don't even call it teaching. It's about empowering young people to develop those higher order skills, if you will, that will be universal and evergreen. Now, we do talk, we have very specific kind of hard skills that we teach, so to speak. Graphic design, computer programming, filmmaking, there's 14 different topics. But they're an excuse to foster some of the softer skills. But that's too easy an answer. All of us would answer this question by saying you need to foster the softer skills, cooperation, self-confidence, a growth mindset, etc. Sure, it's not enough. I think there are two facets to the answer that go a bit deeper. One is to put the emphasis on projects rather than skills. In other words, young people need to have the space to do creative self-expression, to personal projects, to creating things, making things. Once you do that, suddenly everything that the young person is learning, picking up, is something they need to do their project because they're all about self-expression. We say at TUMO, kids hate to study, but they love to learn. And the reason they love to learn is because they want to be cool, they want to impress their friends, they want to be famous, so they have lots of projects in mind. And I think if we talk about education reform, maybe more of a project-centered, outcome-centered approach would be better, because then it becomes about pick up the skills you need for your ambitions, rather than these are the skills you will need, because they're probably not, right? The other facet is all about AI. Everybody's favorite vowels, right, these days. AI is vindicating a little bit this, what all of us in my kind of corner of the world have been saying about don't train for specific careers. It is probably the wrong place to place your bets. Now with AI, that's becoming more and more obvious. And now it's important to understand what's the relationship of the learner or the young person with AI. Now that's where it becomes a really existential, almost not existential, okay, but very critical question. Because, and recently thinkers have been talking about being a creator using AI, being a consumer, or being a critic, right? And so at the intersection of these, somebody who's a non-critical, non-creative consumer is probably going to be at the wrong end of the digital divide. It's and a lot of the disadvantaged populations in the world are at the danger of becoming even more marginalized, because AI will be so effective in making them consumers that they will be left out of the innovation ecosystems that create those very systems, right? And so we need to think about how to have critically oriented consumers who are also creators. You can't avoid being consumers, we're all consumers, but you also have to create. So again, the emphasis, even in the case of the AI question, is on empowering kids to have personal projects, to have ambitions. They all do, but not stifling them, and not teaching hard skills as an end, but as a means. So we found that having kids reach that level where they can become unstoppable does require teaching hard skills, even if those skills would be obsolete. because those are the skills they need to actualize their self-expression. They need to create something. They'll be very disappointed in their own creation if it's not of a certain quality, right? So they need to learn to code. They need to learn graphic design, depending on their ambitions, right? Or music composition, whatever it may be. And so I think the answer to making young learners future-proof, AI-proof, is to put the emphasis on their instinct for creative self-expression. That's what it comes down to.
Just a quick follow-up question again. How do you specifically future-proof the curriculum? Are there some specific tools that you use in order to future-proof your own curriculum for this?
Yes. So first of all, there's two layers to that. One is the platform. We have a software platform which is all about creating personal learning plans that are individual to every student. So no two learning plans are similar, with a lot of choice. And we have an advantage over schools, which is that we're not beholden to a standard curriculum. We don't have to teach two equations with two unknowns or anything like that. We teach it, or the student learns it if they're interested in that. So choice is part of the technology that we use. But also there's a lot of automation behind it. We use AI to create these learning paths. And in order to do it at scale, because right now we have, just in Armenia, 25,000 students that attend on a weekly basis, you need to automate. So automation, creating that intellectual property is key. I don't know if I answered the question directly, but I think
that helps.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think that also segues very nicely to Jainaba, because we can't talk about technology without talking about the digital divide. I should mention here that Jainaba is our Gen Z representative as well. So I think it is particularly important for us to hear your voice in this conversation. You advocate for open networks in Gambia, where internet penetration seems to be in the range of 35%, while 65% of the population can be described as youth. So given these kinds of demographics, and also given the fact that Gen Z is the first generation to truly be a digital native generation, how do you bridge that divide between people who have access to technology and people who don't? And I'm asking specifically in the context of during the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, we found out that access to remote learning was not equitable.
Yeah, I think that is a very good question. So I will start by saying it is very important to look at the accessibility and affordability of the internet connectivity in the Gambia. Am I being audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would actually start by saying that what we're trying to do is to create open networks for the Gen Z generation. Like you said, we are, like I said before, we are the future. Without the Gen Z, there is no future for the world. So looking at the generation right now, internet connectivity, it's crucial and it's very, very important. You look at the Gambia and look at other countries. I'm not saying European countries, but look at the, let's say Senegal, our neighboring country. When you look at them, like their internet connectivity and how affordable it is, it's actually outstanding, and how we can actually adapt, because it's one of the smallest countries in West Africa. We are trying to adapt and to learn new things and to transform digitally. So Open Networks is trying to make sure that internet connectivity and affordability is one of the most reliable to young people. So what the government is trying to do here is the government put in place like the tax to telecoms. Mm-hmm. You have telecoms in their Gambia where they actually provide internet connectivity. Before it was like very expensive, you know, young people like us couldn't afford it. So in order to connect to the internet, you have to go to universities, libraries, and etc. to make sure that you have internet connectivity. So here we're talking about how we can make it accessible and affordable. So the government comes with a framework that is the PURA, there is a public regulator that is responsible for that. So they come with this framework to reduce the tax for the urban areas, the rural areas, where internet connectivity has been a challenge for those young people. So, and as well, Open Gambia comes with this project, with this initiative to create open networks where those young people as well, when the internet connectivity is affordable and accessible, they can actually go and register themselves and do online courses, have access to jobs, and do digital marketing, and they will actually base in their areas. There's no need for them to come to the town or the urban areas to make sure that they have this this internet connectivity and for it to be reliable to them. Yes, thank you.
So what according to you would you say is the future of open networks? Do you think who do you think would be the main service provider in the future?
Pardon?
Who would provide the access to the network in the future? Do you think this needs to be done through government or through private participants?
I think it's a work. It's both.
Okay.
Both private and non-NGOs and government. Government is playing his own part by making sure that they put in these frameworks to reduce taxes to private sectors. So it's now for the private sectors and NGOs like Open Gambia is doing. They actually wait until the government reduce those kind of things so that it can be easy for those people. And then you look at the GSM operators as well. So we have like 4 GSM operators companies in Gambia, and now the fifth one is coming, which is actually one of the greatest thing I can actually see in the Gambia. And Gambia is actually growing in the digital era rapidly, because before we don't have digital Ministry of Digital Economy, but now we have one, and they're actually transforming into the digital world, be part of the digital world. Yeah.
Do you have concerns about data as a result of this?
Yeah, data is one of the, I can say data is one of the areas that the government is most concerned about, and young people as well. I advocate for data protection, and then we have, right now there is a bill that is at the National Assembly, yet not voted yet, but like we're advocating for young people to know their rights and to protect their data. Because, okay, you look at the GSM operators, they have your data, who you talk to daily. So as a young person, you go to different countries, like when I was in Qatar, when I was coming, in order for me to stay connected, I had to use VPN to make sure that I connect with family and friends. In Gambia, I didn't even know that I have to use the VPN. So in Gambia, like I use VPN, but like not much, because it's not a restriction for us. So these are things that mechanism and frameworks that we can put in place to make sure that data are protected for young people, and it's because you should have the right to data. Data should be one of the data should be protected no matter what. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think speaking of connectivity, let's zoom out onto the global stage. So Vanshica, I'd love to bring you in here. Your work on climate initiatives at the Asian Development Bank kind of puts you at the intersection of development and sustainability. And given the ongoing debate about whether institutional reform can keep pace with the rapidity of intervention that climate activists are very actively advocating for, can you tell us a little bit about what your insider perspective is? What is a climate first agenda? How does that look for a development bank? What does sustainability look like for a development bank?
Sure. Thank you so much for that question. So I'll kind of break down my answer on multiple fronts because there are many layers to it. And I'd like to throw light on actually the fact that entities, and as we very rightly said, that when we think about redrawing, the economy, polity, society from a youth perspective, climate is right at the forefront. And therefore, institutional change across the public, private sector, institutions such as development banks is absolutely paramount. What has been good to see is that institutions like the Asian Development Bank have actually been quite proactive and been quite a first mover in making that change. And what does that look like? So, for instance, the bank back in 2019 actually pivoted to being the climate bank for Asia Pacific and beyond. And that has meant that climate as a focus being cross-cutting across sectors. As we know that most of the climate spotlight has gone to sectors such as energy, industries, mobility and transport. But sectors such as health and education have been laggard sectors. So the bank, along with other MDBs and other institutions in the development space, are taking that step to bridge that bridge this gulf. If we look at the global disease burden, 75, or rather, let me correct myself, 25% of the global disease burden is linked to environmental risks. Yet only 0.5% of multilateral climate finance till now has gone to health. And this gap has only been identified in the past few years. So when you actually kind of look at the chronology, you see that evolution and that agenda building has been very rapid. And internationally, if you want to understand the timeline, according to the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Outlook as well, in the short, medium, and long term, climate and health come as the major risk factors. And children are at the forefront of it. A child born today, children and youth, a child born today will witness a world that is 4 degrees warmer than pre-industrial levels, and that impact will be experienced from infancy to adulthood in all forms, be it all kinds of health diseases, physical, mental, and the social and economic challenges that come along with it. Therefore, what I'm happy to share is that this gap is being filled, and as we move from agenda building, now there is a shift towards piloting and project operationalization, because for development banks as entities, any package of solutions has to be bankable, has to be cross-sectoral, and projects are very long drawn. So they're usually at least 4 to 5 or 7 years long on average. So how do we bring together interventions, stakeholders across the board? So within this, the sector being, for instance, climate and health being critical, as I said, youth as a demography is a leading role to play, not only as the fact that they're one of the first to be hit, but also as solution providers. And therefore, we're making sure that as we expand engagement from sovereign client countries to bringing the private sector, innovators, entrepreneurs, what does the landscape look like? Be it for extreme weather events, for challenges such as heat stress, urban air pollution, climate-ready human resource for health, blended finance for climate and health solutions. So we're looking at a whole spectrum of possibilities, and I'm happy to tell you that it's not just the ADB, but also entities like World Bank, which have also set up climate and health program. We have the Climate and Health Initiative, and other entities in this ecosystem. And just to add that on the climate skills front, by 2030, it's expected that we need at least 24 million people with climate skills. But as of now, only 1 in 8 are trained in climate skills. And what does climate skills even entail? I think for a lot of people, you think of probably, solar engineer or a more, somebody with only technical expertise, but actually it's a whole bunch of things, because you need, institutions are evolving, there's landscape ecosystem evolution, you need people who are with a focus on environmental policy, with data analysis. So even that kind of skilling and training is very, very important.
So we've talked a lot about the intersection of health and climate, but but you also mentioned something about multi-sectoral involvement. So I'm curious if there is a lot of non-traditional sectors that you're also looking to invest in.
Right. So actually the non-traditional sectors are the human and social development sectors that when we were having that chat and we were talking about. So these have been the laggard ones, but of course, as a development bank, there has been huge focus on mobility, transport projects, on, as I mentioned, industries. So a lot of work has already been happening there, but this has been such a gap. So now what has been announced and the commitments that we have include that, in social and human development sectors, every project will have at least 15% of climate finance, to make sure that the bank members, staff members, as well as external stakeholders, senior leadership across public-private sector are trained. We have new courses which have a huge accelerator courses, which have a huge climate focus, and because as development banks, as multilateral entities, there's huge scope for identifying global best buys, developing joint methodologies and reviews, and kind of bringing the regions and the best of possibilities across nations. So that has also been a focus in these non-traditional sectors.
So what I'm finding fascinating in nearly all the conversations we've had so far is that we keep circling back to education and skill development somehow. So Malshi, I'd love to bring you in. You are our academic on this panel, and you're researching the blue economy in Seychelles, where it's interesting to note also that tourism accounts for about 70% of GDP. Tourism is also a major climate contributor. And so I'd love for you to sort of connect the dots here for us between sustainability efforts, educational reform, and also how do we equip the young Seychellois for a sustainable world without profiting from what we now know is a dying ecosystem?
Thank you for having me. Actually, you connected the dots very well for me because I can answer that question straight up, but my co-panelists have done such a good job in laying that foundation because I teach Gen Z. I have that paradoxical generation in my classroom. So as background, I work at the University of Seychelles, and the population of the Seychelles is 104,000 people. That's it. So my student body is also logically very small. I've got about 400 to 500 students currently at this university. And we are the only university in Seychelles. And fun fact, our classes are predominantly, I would say, dominated by women. Girls tend to outnumber boys. And I've understood from my friend from the Gambia that this is trending across Africa and possibly around the world. So for my students, their world seems to be defined by very rapid technological changes and very rapid socio-political changes as well. But they are a generation that while, yes, they've inherited some fantastic things, climate-wise, they have not inherited such a great world. Living in the Seychelles, coming from a small island development state, my students are very aware of the negative impacts of climate change because we are living it and we are seeing it every day. We see the rising sea levels. We see changing weather patterns. We're living it almost every day. And they tend to push for, I think, more radical action. And the country as a whole has voiced or come to take a stand with respect to climate change. So the Seychelles launched a blue economy framework in 2018. And it is a model that is centered around environmental conservation, social equity, as well as just making sure that things are sustainable and the ocean is used responsibly. Its resources are used responsibly for future generations. The University of Seychelles also has a Blue Economy Research Institute that it launched around the same time. So my students are very radical, they are very outspoken, And as an example, I've got this youth-led NGO that most of my students are a part of. And a couple of years ago, they collected a lot of plastic from the beaches and from the seas. And they set up this tunnel in the middle of my capital city, Victoria. And it was placed in such a way that it forced pedestrians to walk through this tunnel of plastic. And they were trying to raise awareness about how marine species are living in their ecosystems surrounded by plastic, and how we at the end of the day tend to consume this plastic because we tend to eat what we take from the oceans. It's this kind of radical and innovative approaches that you're seeing from Gen Z. But a major concern is if they perceive inaction from our side, from an institution or from a generational perspective, if they perceive inaction, could it lead to disillusionment, and could it lead to disappointment? So the Seychelles has taken a number of different initiatives with respect to blue economy. We were the first country to launch a blue bond in the world, and it was valued at around 15 million US dollars. We are also the country that declared 30% of its marine space a marine protected area in 2020 at the height of COVID. And we are one of the few countries that managed to meet that SDG goal well ahead of its time. But at the end of the day, we do need to consider how are we factoring Gen Z into decision making? How are we factoring Gen Z into leadership decisions? So at the university, we have a Senate committee, and students form part of that committee. And one of the loveliest things about living in a country that has such a small population is that these students will go to a meeting and the president of Seychelles will attend. Why? Because he's the vice chancellor of the university, obviously. So they get to have that one-on-one time with the president, with the leader of the country, and they tend to voice their opinions and their issues and their concerns straight into the ears of the country's leadership. And I will come back a little bit to the question of education. We've heard such good perspectives here about education, and I come from an institution that continues to be a little bit rigid. Higher education, in my opinion, is still a little bit rigid. And I say this from the example that you have a student who attends 12 weeks of a semester and then sits a 3-hour exam, and that is how we measure that student's progress, and that is how we ascertain whether that student is now ready for a degree. And I feel that there are many other ways that we can test our students on their progress and on their intelligence. And I would like to advocate for a more evolved curriculum, not just future-proofing, but also one that tends to connect more with industry and jobs and workplaces, and one that is perhaps a little bit more global in terms of citizenship. And lastly, perhaps a little bit more interdisciplinary learning. Climate change is cross-cutting, and I have students who are not only learning about climate change, but learning about how to bring in economics, how to bring in social changes, how to bring in political changes. So these are all things that I feel that we can do a little bit more coming from higher education. And I'll just stop on this note. My students are the generation that grew up with a smartphone in their hand. And the digital overload that I see them facing, the fact that there is not much conversation at higher education levels around mental health. As a university, we tend to put so much stress on academic performance. But is that a cost that we can truly afford in this era, in this landscape, in this world? Thank you.
A follow-up question, Malshi. You closed on a note about mental health, and again, thank you for tying all of these perspectives in together with your answer. You also at some point brought in gender and how the rates of enrollment are changing, which is wonderful news as well. What I'm curious about is, from the mental health perspective, how much of this is future-related anxiety? So climate anxiety, jobs anxiety. I mean, in every possible way, the future is more uncertain. Charlotte spoke about a VUCA world. How much of this is future-related anxiety, do you think?
Lovely question. A little bit future-related, yes. A lot future-related, but also anxiety and stress because of the rigidity and the requirements that's placed on them from a higher education institute that perhaps does not understand the generation that is coming up. When you have lecturers who are in their 40s or in their 50s or in their 60s, who are perhaps very pedantic on how they want their course to be run and how they want their assignments to be done, I feel that from a higher education institution, there needs to be a little bit more consideration towards the fact that this is a generation that is quite new to us. this is a generation that we totally don't understand, but we have the responsibility to make the safe space for them and to understand them. So a lot of the mental stress is also because of where they're coming to for the degree, right? And I have more girls than boys, so I'm not too sure whether that is a pressure as well on our young men, that they perhaps do not feel that they are equipped to come to these institutions and to get the degree, and they prefer to perhaps try alternative avenues, which is perfectly fine. But I do have now this situation where I have more girls. They are definitely a little bit more stressed. They tend to veer towards perfectionism and wanting to get everything right and being feared to be seen, which I think that as a university, we cannot afford this cost. This is the generation that has inherited a world where climate change is ravaging their future, and we cannot afford to send them out into the world without thinking holistically about their development, not just their academic performance.
Thank you, and thank you for reminding us all not to be pedantic. And finally, Ram, you're shaping policy for what is the most populous country in the world and arguably the youngest population or the largest youth population in the world. This, like anything else, gives us both opportunities and challenges. For one thing, I think Gen Z's policy making will be very much shaped by the fact that they're growing up in a much more interconnected world than any prior generation. So as Gen Z enters the policy making workforce, what kind of international relations can we expect in the future? What is the future of foreign policy?
Thank you very much for having me. I think all of my colleagues have spoken extensively about challenges, so I would rather focus on opportunities and a little bit of a positive picture, if I may say so. I mean, from India, I work in government, I work in foreign ministry, so some of the things that I will talk about is largely from that perspective. So to begin with, in India, if I can say from a government perspective, every policy measure that's coming out, it could be traditional security, it could be trade and economics, it could be internationalization of our education system, or it could be data privacy, or new 5G and 6G policy that we are talking about. Everything has in mind how it's going to affect our largest consumer base, which is the youth of the country. 65% by whatever age group, however you categorize it, they are the largest consumers. They are the largest constituents for the government. In few years, many of them will vote in every election, and many of them will vote quickly. So, keeping that in mind, governments are making policy. So, as we speak, from an Indian government perspective, I would say that we are very much aware of it. A lot of our inputs are based on how the new generation is reacting, using the tools. How government has learned very fast. I will tell you, not very long back when I joined service, all that we would issue is a very dry, lengthy press statement, which we'll hand over to printouts to the press corps, and after about 2 days, we'll put it up on our website. Now we are on about 24 platforms, and every time our foreign minister, our prime minister travels abroad, has an engagement, we have got video clips tailored for every one of the mediums, from a 3-minute video for a Twitter outgoing to a 12-second or a 13-second Insta reel to everything. So it shows that the governments are alive, they want to reach and they want to engage the population. Again, we are assuming that governments are only making policy. So the way the younger generation is engaging with technology, because many of them are, the consequences or the implications or where they are headed is not clear to even policymakers. Some of the technologies we talked about now. So, but we will learn from how the younger generation is using them. In a very, I can give you an example. Cultural diplomacy is where, all the governments, we engage in cultural diplomacy. We send troops, music concerts we organize. You see the younger generation using, connecting new tools, making Insta reels, and they are popular in some other corner of India. So when a foreign dignitary comes to India, he says, you have a rapper called Humankind who is viral in every platform in my country, and then I will Google and see who is Humankind and why is he popular in thousands of kilometers from India. So I would say there is need for an awareness of the challenges we face, but at the same time there is no need for a pessimism. So I think every generation, I am old enough to remember, both in terms of the generational gap, and also skepticism about technology, new and emerging technologies. To remember that people would say Generation X, we don't know what this generation stands for. It's a very confused generation. We don't know where they are headed. They're ideologically, we don't know where they're going to land up. Similarly, a great phobia about, including in India, about what computers and internet would do, computers particularly would do to employment. You look now after 30 years and our largest exports are in services sector based on the software economy. So I would say that while we are required to be aware of the challenges, like all my co-panelists talked about, but there is no need to be so pessimistic about it, and we have to trust the new generation. They will, and we have I always recall my grandparents and parents looking at us with a degree of skepticism. What's he going to do? What are they going to do? We are much more smarter. This guy is so unfocused, or whatever it is. But I'm sure we all learned it well, and we are facing the new challenges. So let us have trust in Gen Z and the new generation. I'm not at all discounting the challenges, but I'm saying there is no reason for cynicism or fear of what's going to come, but rather a little bit more of an optimistic outlook is what we need probably. So that's what I'm bringing to the panel.
Thank you. But quite specifically, I'm also curious, how do you think they will shape foreign policy? Like, how do you think when Gen Z is in charge of our world, how do you think international relations will change? We know, for example, that Gen Z has a much more empathetic approach, at least globally, towards issues like migration. We know that they are in favor of peace-building efforts. What do you think are the specific changes that we will see when Gen Z inherits the policy framework?
So, my own observation, we already have, new batches in the government service who are, borderline Gen Z. So one thing is their comfort level with technology. Technology is a horizontal cross-cutting. It's both a policy-making tool as well as a variable in its own way. So they are much more comfortable, and they look at technology as a major segue, a major tool for every policy solution, which was not so much in earlier generations. So that, whether you are talking about migration, climate change, sustainability, any of the SDGs, some of them we talked about here, or even traditional areas of security, which will bring us to, we have been talking about with industry, we have been talking about militarization of AI, which is one of the concerns. Global conversations are happening on that. So everywhere they bring in a very fresh perspective, and a perspective that is not fearful of the technology, I would say, to the conversation. They're much more comfortable with, I'm in charge of this technology rather than I will let the technology dictate how I'm going to deal with this. So that is a major change I observe.
Thank you. Before we open up to the audience, let's end with one closing remark from each of our panelists. So I would like to request each of you to propose one radical change in your respective area that you think would genuinely empower Gen Z by the year 2034. And here's the key. What are you willing to personally sacrifice to make that change happen? So single sentence answers, please, and in rapid succession. Let's start with you, Ram.
I would say it's a bit patronizing for me to say I'm going to sacrifice something, but I don't have to look for one or two or three things where I'm going to let go. And so this is going to happen. So it's in my own survival instinct that I adopt to them, rather than I am doing any favor to Gen Z so that they can better adopt. It's the other way around. The generations before, they need to look out for themselves. They need to be alert on their toes, because they are going to be extinct species if they don't. So it's actually the other way around in my view.
I would say, as a Gen Z, we're already sacrificing a lot for ourselves. And being a young person, advocating for a lot for young people like me and others who are actually facing challenges in our workplaces, in our educational systems, many more. So I think we're already doing a lot for ourselves. The only thing we need is from you guys to make the sacrifices for us. Thank you.
So professionally, I'd say the areas that I outlined are very seminal and very new. So there will be an evolution from more strategy and upstream activities, very specifically to more downstream operations. And by 2034, would really like to be part of the pool of people kind of globally working and actualizing and delivering on-ground solutions on this front. And I think personally, as was very well put by our fellow panelists here, that even I see that way, that not as a personal commitment, not as a sacrifice, but actually the fact that as a big contribution, as a young person myself, really value the platforms and the spaces that I've had opportunities to, that have given me good grounding and good, I would say, spaces for either you call it dress rehearsals or upskilling. And that's a continuous commitment that I have, that in whatever way possible to bring young people in more decision making, be it through having more engagement, informal, more councils, bringing the youth cross demography within sectoral focus in whatever that we're doing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think a supportive higher education environment that nurtures well-being as well as academic performance. So in a nutshell, a degree with a heart, and that's not a sacrifice, that's an investment. Thank you.
How powerful is that? I love that. I'm so in support. I honestly think for us, there's actually two questions we need to be asking ourselves. It's not just what are we sacrificing, but what are we going to radically commit to? And so from my seat, and I think Pagor and Malshini, and you also spoke so well to it around the opportunities that exist in front of us, we need to challenge ourselves as leaders. Every single person sat in this room has had invitation here because you're a leader in your own right. How are we going to challenge ourselves to show up better, more committed, and more completely as leaders? If we think we sit in this room without blind spots, we are heavily mistaken, right? By virtue of ongoing learning and development, we should be questioning and challenging ourselves with, what is it I don't know today? It is the single best question we can be asking ourselves. From a sacrificial perspective, I'm willing to give my seat up at the table. And I seriously mean that. I think one of the biggest and strongest commitments we can make, recognizing this generation is going to compose 30% of our workforce in all areas and domains by 2030, I believe. The biggest thing we can commit is to giving them working opportunities to start figuring it out with support. They have huge energy, huge engines for activism. I think you said it, huge willingness to do radical innovation and reform if they are enfranchised in the conversation. So our responsibility, how am I creating opportunities for you today, even if I don't think you look ready? And how do I stand behind you and support you in the process of that? That is a huge commitment we can all make in areas with opportunities that sit in front of us with our own organizations and our own people around us. So that's one thing I would really like to commit. The other thing I think really important for us to consider too is how, from a technology perspective, do we encourage the conversation of optimism moving forward around how do we look at technologies as an optimization opportunity for us as a species, as a people, rather than an inherent risk or a challenge to our future. And I think that's going to require a conversation from both sides. As leaders ourselves, how do we become more present? How do we listen better? I would like to challenge you in your next panel to see how long you can stay off your phone before you feel the need to touch it. We are setting the example of what presence and attendance and attention looks like. So, how are we going to do that and use technology as an optimization instead of a distraction? So I'll leave you with that as a bit of a thought and a challenge if you so wish to take it.
Okay, I'm going to give a slightly more radical, earnest answer. I would increase the rights of young people, non-adults. I would give them some of the rights that adults currently have at the legislative, national, societal level, especially in education. And what I would sacrifice is compulsory education, maybe with the hope of fostering a more efficient, effective, consensual education.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. And I think we'll move on to audience questions if there are any.
Hi, this is Manish Chand, Center for Global India Insights. I'm a little uneasy about this term GenZ. I get the feeling that it tends to exoticize them. And as you're saying that probably young adults or younger generation would be better. That's number one. Also, I feel that, we need to have systematic studies of how foreign policy decisions, choices, impact the young generation. That is, for example, now today, for example, is the age of polycrisis. You have conflict in all corners and how young people are affected. Youth is a repository of idealism. Imagine the kind of damage it's doing to their psyche, because of the choices made by our leaders who are caught up in the geopolitical games. So we need more studies of youth-centric foreign policy and the impact of foreign policy choices on younger generation. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Did you have a question to any of our panelists?
How do we do these studies? Can the ministry, for example, Raghu is there, or are some studies being undertaken? I'm not familiar with that. So maybe one of the panelists can talk about it.
Would anyone like to take that?
In terms of studies, not specifically targeted at Gen Z or a particular generation, but yes, how do they affect every segment of the population, which is, when it comes to India, it is the largest constituency, as I said. But again, I'm again playing a bit of a devil's advocate here, that this is something that's happening in only in our lifetime, and it hasn't happened ever before, is something that I don't subscribe to. The factors may be different, the situation may be different, but every 20 years, 30 years, if I look at my parents' generation, I look at my grandparents' generation, the factors may be different, but everybody thought they are at the cusp of something either big or something very difficult, or so I would rather be a little bit more, I would say, measured and a little bit more circumspect when we talk about a new generation that is in a very unique way getting affected, particularly in a negative way. But I would rather say that the younger generations are probably better equipped because there are better tools, there are better conversations like this happening. It didn't happen when we were in school. I have never, or my grandparents. So in that way, there is a greater degree of awareness. There is greater degree of inputs into the policy. I am not aware of any time, at least in India, where the government, every ministry, every department, every policy making body is so self-aware about this particular segment, how it is affecting them, and to reach out and do consultations with the particular stakeholders. I don't think it has ever been the case. So I would say that I wouldn't say we are doing everything that we should be doing, but I'm saying we are doing better than any time in the last probably 40, 50 years when it comes to engaging the younger population. So that's what I would feel.
Just to add to that, in terms of phrasing and, as you mentioned, studies and focusing on youth and involving more youth on topics important to them, I'd like to throw light on a community that I've been part of that I think has been very, very empowering and doing some great work. So this is the Global Shapers community, which is a World Economic Forum initiative for people under 30 in different cities, 400 cities across the world, and a lot of critical topics, climate related, where they've actually used the terming of generation restoration. So they've actually put together youth councils, both continent-wise and globally, to work on specific tracks, specific work streams around climate. Similarly, what they do is that not only the regular programming, but also Black Swan events as we experienced during COVID, they made sure that there was a COVID International Steering Committee that was put together for the young global shapers, where there were 10 of us, which I was also part of, where we actually worked with the headquarters in supporting, hand-holding the 400 hubs on COVID response at a ground level through these like youth hubs. And I've been very pleasantly surprised to see how much space they've given to young people and kind of given a seat at the table where we've been part of these councils, but also then given additional spaces through intergenerational opportunities where we're working with or jointly problem solving with maybe like a CEO level, C-suite level members, or like ministerial level representatives. So there are entities that are doing great work here, maybe little lesser known, but thought I'll throw light on it.
I was just going to build on the very same point, which is I think the overall sense for this generation is the time for talking and researching is done. We really need to move into action. So the key question for me is not how do we better research this generation? The key question for me is how do we actually engage this generation in a conversation and provide them seat and access to the conversation itself? No longer what might be the impact, tell me what is the impact to you. No longer what could this decision mean for you? Tell me how would you decide around this and what is your rationale and reasoning for that? So I think for us a big opportunity here, and I think you began to touch on it, every country, every organization, every system is going to look at this slightly different because it means different things for different people in different places around the world. We're not going to give a one-stop shop global solution here. But I think, if you're in a position of political power, is there a conversation to be had about voting ages and the ability to vote at a younger age and get involved in the system sooner? If you're in a position of power around, access to opportunities to represent, in Parliament, the age for some countries is 25. In other places, it's as young as 18. So we look at that and I say, is there opportunity there to re-examine? You asked me earlier the question around, do we need to review the system? And I would say strongly yes. When we look at businesses and we look at working groups, we tend to look for people's academic qualification to say, who's the smartest person I'm going to invite to this room? Can we challenge that? Can we look at the people that are active and present and communicative that could be presented an opportunity to start getting working experience by joining those working groups? So from that lens, I would just challenge, I think the research question is a really valid one because I sense what you're really asking here is how do we better understand impacts? And I would simply say that is one approach. The other that is very present and available to us if we so wish to challenge ourselves to undertake it is a difference of action on our side.
Can I go to very briefly? I don't pretend to answer the question directly, but more to speak about this idea of exoticizing Gen Z or your claim that this is just old people saying young people these days are weird, it's happened all the time. I think there's a difference now, which is that we're very focused on kind of creating an ontology of young people, categorizing them, classifying them into Gen Z, millennials, etc. This is different a little bit, and I think we have to admit that this comes from a focus on them as consumers. The people who come up with these terms are marketers, right? And so that maybe, if a study needs to be done, also maybe around the rights of kids or young people to be seen as consumers and being subjected to that kind of power differential between the consumer and the producer.
We can take one more question, I'm told.
Hi. So, Kara Englewood again. I'm coming from the heart of the Silicon Valley. And so I want to touch on a very important point about Gen Z and mental health. So roughly half, like 47% was announced recently are experiencing mental health. And unfortunately, I see this all the time, especially from the heart of high tech. And what's interesting, that more we are in high tech, you want to go low tech. And the fact that, you know, a lot of things are popping up, even in San Francisco or other places like board game parlors or, you know, pottery shops, etc., tells that what we need to do, we need to create not distorted digital reality for young generation, but, you know, create in-person, offline experiences. And in that sense, what I'd like to maybe ask you and challenge you, in a sense, creating some sort of mentorship, I would say, you know, age, or I would say different age group where they can come for mentorship, for some sort of support, guidance. Because many times when they're coming out of this digital world, they don't know where to go. They don't know what to do, really.
May I love that you've raised this. When we think about mentors, and you think of a mentor in your mind, who do you envision? I think up to this point, societally, we have always looked up to our elders. And there's huge wisdom that we bring to conversations that an incoming generation simply doesn't have, particularly from a social engagement perspective, an influencing perspective. There is a capability and a wisdom that we bring of what works and what doesn't, right? And how we can help shape, form, build this talent of tomorrow. But it should, at this point, be a two-way street, because there is plenty that we as a generation are not understanding and getting. And so mentorship as we know it really is going to start to evolve, in that if we do the next phase well in our history, in our making as a people and a collective, to solve the big problems we have on the table today, which are at times feeling insurmountable, we are going to require all generations, all hands on deck to be involved in that conversation. And they bring their own creativity, radical innovation of thinking. I love this Roblox piece that I was mentioning to you. The size of Brazil play that game every month, right, as Gen Z. That is a phenomenal amount of creative thinkers in the making. How do we engage that level of thinking to open our minds as well? So two-way mentorship is going to be incredibly important, and I think it's going to support the mental health of all of us. You know, the world has become an incredibly lonely place. I don't know how many of you have felt it in a weekly or a monthly basis. We are sat in the middle of a loneliness pandemic. Mental health is not unique to Gen Z. It's for all of us. We've seen an upshot in suicide, anxiety, depression, globally at all ages. This just happens to be the generation suffering the most. So I love your question, because I think that question supports and benefits all of us if we do this well, and if we're willing to put our egos aside and say, I'm going to learn from you today. What can you teach me about X, right? And that, when I do leadership development, when I'm working with leaders all over the world, I'm really looking for us to challenge our traditional ways of doing things and thinking for the betterment of all of us. Thank you.
Okay, I would want to say one or two things. Being a Gen Z, it is very, very important, like what Shai was actually talking about, giving opportunity to young people. Like, it is actually unique being the only Gen Z here, and I'm so happy. So, actually, being a Gen Z and trying to mentor young people, it's like one of the greatest things that I'm actually doing right now. So, if we have that opportunity from you guys, having young people here, trying to tell them, like in Kigali, after my roundtable in 2023, Hebashans actually told me that I want to be your mentor. I was like, that is amazing. From there, I was given a bigger panel in Cape Town Conversation to talk about, to speak on digital public infrastructure, sharing a stage with experts. And I'm not even an expert on that area, and I'm still learning. So these are opportunities that, you guys are giving, and it's incredible. So I would say you're doing great, but just keep pushing and then keep, inspiring young people like me to, work hard and to do great impacts as well. Thank you.
I think that's a wrap. Thank you so much for...
That's an intergenerational agreement and
Yeah.
something.
I think that's the note we all wanted to end on, so thank you. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us.